In this lecture, we're going to talk about landscape photography. Landscape photography is our photography. Obviously, that's nature. Um, my connection to landscape photography is actually pretty long. When I was living in Boise, Idaho, I took a class from a landscape photographer who was teaching in adult continuing education at one of the local high schools, and it was an expensive class, and he taught photography basics. And a group of us got to be friends, and we used to go shoot together. And he makes a living as a landscape photographer. His name is Ed Ritchie, and Ed has worked with and under another famous landscape architect named landscape photographer named David Munk. And David knew Ansel Adams. So I'm three or 4 degrees separation from Ansel Adams. I always like to tell that story because I think it's kind of silly. Okay. So aerial photography is a style of landscape photography, and this is taken from an airplane looking down. Got a lot of pattern, flow, texture, beautiful. Your goal is typically to make landscape images look the way you see or feel so others can vicariously experience the scenery. However, that's not always the case. And there are landscape photographers who shoot very surreal landscape scenes and, like anything, breaking the rules. Generally, technically, logistically, and artistically, you usually want to keep things simple in the process of shooting. Landscapes are by their nature ever changing. And one of the things I like to tell students is the sun is in a different position in the sky every minute of every hour of every day of the year. If you look at the sun, because of the way we are turning, we are the ones moving, right? We're rotating and moving around the sun. Our position changes every minute of every day of every year, every minute of every hour of every day of every year. And so what ends up happening is the light is constantly changing. And so one of the things that contribute to different feels and looks and moods and everything, things that change with landscape photography are the weather, the light, and the season. So what happens with the sun is it starts off, pick any minute of any day of any year, and the sun starts off in a specific position. And then as you trace it through the sky, it moves right from east. Sun rises in the east, sets in the west. So it moves from east to west during the day. But then also throughout each year, the sun moves in our sky from, depending on where you start, from far left to far right, from winter to summer and back. And so every time it's moving and it's in a different spot. Weather impacts our landscape photography in a whole bunch of different ways. For one, the clouds you have in the sky depend on the kind of sunset background you may get. These are some cacti in the desert, and this is right after sun has set. And the clouds in the sky, the really cool clouds, caught the sun on its way down. The sun is actually behind us, and this is in the opposite direction. And so the clouds caught that on the sun's way down and created this beautiful landscape image. Obviously storms, I'm sure you guys know there are storm chasers that go out there and literally chase these storms so they can photograph them. One of the wildest things I ever experienced was when I was actually moving to Boise. On the way there, I experienced a sandstorm, and the whole sky was pink, and it was like you were in fog, but it was pink fog, and obviously the sand was blowing around. And it was just very surreal. It's never been anything like that in my life. This is off the coast of Antarctica. And somebody got this moon, single cloud, and there is someone or something right there. Pretty cool. The light changes, and as we talked about, from every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year. And where the light is depends on the shot you get. So this shot, if you just stood in that same spot and shot the same shot over and over and over, say you did it in hourly increments. So you started at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way around to 6 o'clock the next morning, shot every hour for 24 hours, the light would have changed and you would get a different shot in every single exposure. Most, if you want to sell landscape photography, and I'm going to tell you it's extremely competitive because so many people want to do this. You get to be outside, you get to travel. It's amazing. I absolutely loved when I ran with that circle of photographers in Idaho. Loved all the traveling we did. And because Boise is right there at the foothills, right after work, we could go shoot. And so most photography that sells, they want your shot to be taken in the golden hour. And so when you're shooting in the golden hour, you get this beautiful natural lighting that most people like. It's just very calm, soothing. It's beautiful. Seasons matter. These are trees covered in so much snow that they're like bent over like characters. It's more ice. Swimming. So you've got multiple factors that determine how you're going to shoot: the exposure, the illumination of the scene. What is your composition, right? You have to frame your shot. And one of the most important things that you learn in composition for photography is that you shoot something in the foreground, middle ground, background. And then you need a subject. And the subject can be in the foreground, the middle ground, or the background. Okay, so one of the most difficult things with shooting outside is what the metering that your camera reads. And so that's why for those of you that are using, any camera really, you want to bracket. You want to get the exposure the camera gives you, and then you want to overexpose and you want to underexpose. And bracketing is when you take what the camera says, you go one stop overexposed, and one stop underexposed, and then you compare to see what really is your best shot. So this one is, correctly exposed, this one's underexposed, this one's overexposed, and maybe somewhere in between the two of these is actually the better shot. That's a little too much overexposed, but the correctly exposed picture, in my opinion, doesn't have enough contrast. So that's why you want to take more than one shot at multiple exposures. Now, we don't really get into that in this class on purpose because I really want you all to initially focus on composition. But in photography too, we talk about how to get those shots. And we're going to get more into this in photography too, but here is just sort of the basics for those of you guys who want to understand how your camera works. Exposure triangle. Exposure is a matter of design. What is it that you're focusing on? What exposure do you need for your mood? It's not always a one-size-fits-all. Just because the camera says it's the right exposure doesn't always mean that it is. You will often make adjustments to get the right shot, to get the shot that you want. Sometimes you're going to find yourself with situations that are difficult. Here, well, not this shot. This shot's difficult. But front lighting, side lit, and softly illuminated scenes are easy to expose. You just let the camera read them. But when you start getting a strong mix of bright light and deep shadows, it starts getting harder to decide what's the right exposure. You can adjust the image through filters that either go in front of your camera or in Photoshop after you've taken the shot. And this is stuff that we're going to get into in the, you'll take, first of all, you need to take 1010. But if you're in this for the TCC, you want to do the advanced raster imaging, we'll cover these types of things in that course. I just want you to know now, big picture, they exist. And here's just some of the common filters that people use. And you can see, for instance, here, this is an ultraviolet filter that removes that bluish UV tint. This is before. This is with the filter on. There's something else called circular polarizer. It helps darken the sky, and it saturates your scene overall. And you can see the before and the after doing just that. Okay. There's a whole bunch of things that allow you to make adjustments. There are even macro filters. And some of you guys can get those for your cell phone if you want. This is the filter. These filters down here, they're called split neutral density. And it goes over the lens. And they used it here because the sky was bright, compared to the darkness down here in the shadow. So this filter was necessary to be able to get this shot. And there are all these great different filters that allow you to take the best possible shot by putting these filters on your camera. I'm going to tell you that when I started out, because I used to shoot slide film, I have a gazillion filters, and now I rarely use any of them, except maybe the polarizer. And this is a list. You can click on this. This is a guide to lenses. Some of you may want to use them. And I'm not going to encourage or discourage you either way. You sort of have to figure out what works best for you. It is always best, and in general, people say, photographers feel, that it's best to get the shot as close to perfect as you can at the shoot. You want to do as little processing as possible. And that just is because the more you process, the more you degrade the image in general. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop here and continue in the next video.